Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. Honestly, I'm not even going to pretend like I'm the one hosting it. I don't think any of us are. We all agreed to come together, and here we are. So we have with us Andy from the Deep Share podcast. Brother,
What's up?
what's going on? And we have Brandon from Expanding Reality. How are the both you guys doing?
Awesome. I
Nice.
think this is a great gathering, the three of us.
This was been many months in the making, but we got it. So I wanted to, if it's okay with you guys, and if you want to take it any other direction, let me know. But the Bock Saga, you want to jump right into it? Because I will tell you, unless there's something I'm missing, I have no idea myself what it is. And I deliberately did not look it up to learn from you.
It's going to be the best way to approach this. Andy's got it. Yeah.
I think we should maybe let's use it as like a reference point for sure to like branch off of, because I think because I found it about 8 or 9 months ago, probably longer now. I basically found it when Dan and I started becoming friends, and I heard him talking about it on his show. And when I heard it, I wasn't really even sure what it was. It was something about a Scandinavian folklore myth or something like that. But then once I started getting into it, what really clicked for me was the phonetics of the root language they talk about, because it's completely, this is their alphabet, what we're seeing on the screen right now. For those listening, I apologize, but check out the video. But yes, this is Alpharnus Betan, which is the supposed first alphabet of humanity, according to this Finnish lore. And right away, we can see that there's some really creepy similarities to, modern day language. And supposedly this language was here when people were just doing cave paintings and all that. We're talking about taking this idea of like, lost history and Graham Hancock's like shit keeps getting older and just timesing it by 1,000, because supposedly Bock Saga starts at the very beginning of humanity. But, every culture has their myths. So every culture has a fantastical beginning that has no real proof to it, right? So theirs is very, not only bizarre and a little shocking at first, but then once you start looking at the symbolism of all of it, it starts getting really interesting, because their origin story for humanity is the mating of a goat and an ape.
That sounds about right, to be honest.
Yeah. That's what's really creepy. So what's really interesting, I'm kind of fast forwarding before I explain a lot more of the Bock Saga, but what I'm coming to now, what Dan is coming to, what we're starting to talk about is that there's these very solid characteristics of, the divide and conquer mechanism in our culture, in our society, that's always kind of been there. And you look at the symbolism around the most sensitive subjects, and it's like the demonic goat symbolism, right? It all comes from paganism. Well, we're talking about the root of that, not only of that symbolism, but also the interpretations of that symbolism and why it's been demonized and all that. It's a really
sorry, Andy, when you say mechanism, you mean like the blueprint of life, if you will, the blueprint at least of this current, whatever you want to call it?
I would say when we talk about like 13 bloodlines, 13 families, who's running the show, who's behind the gates, like who's, who knows how things were set up and what are their motives. I think the closest we can really come is that at one point or another, I'm not sure if it's all trickery at this point, but at least it seems like the basis for it is this very naturalistic, heathen, pagan, call it whatever you want, that system versus the artificial system. And of course, we can reverberate that idea out to our modern world today and see how we have this archaic revival in the truth community a lot of times. Meanwhile, on the other side, it's this big machine that wants to, automate everything. And it's like built out of sloth.
Transhuman engine.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So when we go back to the Bock Saga's story, we kind of get the other end of all the famous religions we've always heard about and all the history that we've been taught, because there's a Jesus in Bock Saga. There is Ra in Bock Saga. He is the first son of the family. And it's interesting how we can take the fall in Western religions, the fall from grace of Lucifer falling from heaven, Ra. Let me see if I can get this right. Hopefully Dan will check this out and be able to verify if I'm fucking this up. The story in Bock Saga is that this Ra is the firstborn son, and the king is, of course, upholding the family system. And the family system is very specific with the breeding process, because we're talking about people that at one point were desperately trying to maintain the strongest, smartest, most intelligent. So they were inbreeding culturally, not necessarily directly with family like Hicks or like what they might be doing today because of different circumstances, but more of a cultural like caste system. And each one kind of led into the next and this and that. And it was set up perfectly. But this Ra left the area entirely in the story and became like was the rebel son, and in fact the prodigal son as well. But he like basically goes into Egypt, and suddenly you're supposed to worship the sun god, the first son, instead of the system of the very specific system that it was already in place in this perfect society that the Bock Saga suggests was going on. But I'm jumping a little bit. Brandon, go ahead.
And you know what's interesting about this? And I had a guy named Jeff Drum on, and he talked about that his hypothesis is that the pyramids were actually chemical factories. But one thing that he said in there was how this relates to advanced peoples coming across another civilization of maybe lesser advanced technology. I use the example of cargo cults. I think, Dave, you and I have talked about that. And so the idea that somebody comes in with higher advanced technology, but they're viewed as gods because they have like guns, you know, and other people didn't, you know, or something really amazing. But one of the things to this would be like, perhaps this Bock Saga is the origin of like this race of beings or race of people that actually were more advanced for whatever reasons, and we can go crazy on that if you'd like.
Oh, I can get into that too.
Yeah, and then so they spread out after a cataclysm or maybe something like that, and then they came out as these beings of light. Basically, when everyone was kicked, you know, they were down, they were shattered, they were trying to regroup culturally, and then these people come in from these different areas that settle in different places because if Ra came from, you know, this Finnish lore, of course, and settled in Egypt, we know all about that. We know how it relates to the sun god. It's fascinating, man. And so do you think that this is what like Jesus and Buddha and everything, like all of those originate in this and they basically settled on these places?
I have a feeling that we are going to all collectively slowly unfold the missing parts that connect Tartaria, the Bock Saga, Millennial Kingdom that Emmanuel and many others talk about. You know, all these things that seem to be on completely different wavelengths. Just boom, to me they resonate across all barriers. They're just the same. They equal each other, and they're different parts of the same damn story for sure. Dan Unaki Dan just showed me a book that he just got. Let me just pull it up real quick because it's very interesting that he brought this up to me just today. It's called Atlantis of the West: The Case for Britain's Drowned Megalithic Civilization. And it talks about Elysium Fields from Greece, and it talks about, where does it say? Plato's Atlantis can be identified in these Celtic myths and in ancient Egyptian and Greek myths of an underworld known as the Elysian Fields. But yeah, it's crazy how all these different theories seem to go different directions, but I think it's all the same damn story. And this book that he sent me, it also talks about the tilting of the Earth's axis, which is also Bock Saga, which we can get into. But yeah, go ahead, Brandon. Sorry to cut you off there.
No. I'm just excited because this is so cool. I'm
talking too fast too. Woo.
No, you're doing great. This is amazing. So no, I was gonna just say, because the way that now we're relating history, like we know it was all bullshit the way that it was formed, and we've really, I think over the past at least couple of years, probably sooner than that, really started to look into this alternative history idea and these Tartaria and the, you know, Devil's Tower could have been the huge tree and all this kind of cool stuff. And so what's interesting about it though is now it is kind of connecting in certain ways, or exactly to what you just said, seemingly disconnected topics are now being formulated into into really neat packages together, just like the UFO phenomena, just like simulation versus organic God or something like that, or creation. I mean, all of these things are kind of, they make for really strange bedfellows, these ideas, but they really are coming together in such a really interesting way. It's this as above, so below concept, and then extrapolated out to a lot of different high strangeness phenomena as well.
Not too far off from that, supposed ex-military guy talking about Project Looking Glass and
Yep.
how there's some bottleneck that they can't escape,
can't.
how all of these things are converging and going to be
Like a Faraday
revealed.
cage.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and remote viewers say this as well. There's a certain point that every remote viewer gets to, and they can't see past it. So there's like this barrier, and they don't know if that's because of a collapsed timeline. There's a lot of very interesting things that, like, maybe that's the surprise from God, like that's the finale, to where like nobody, even psychics, can see. And I had a conversation. This is going to derail, and we'll get right back on. I promise. I just want to plant this seed for whatever. That maybe the only reason, like, okay, if you think of the observer effect and like something has to be here to observe it to do it, okay? The fact that we have a future may only exist because people with psychic abilities are creating our future by being able to see something. You know what I mean? So this makes just the fact that we exist at all necessary and dependent on people who can visualize the future in any way. Because then you just have possibilities, and then we have the option to continue to create. That's like the engine that drives everything. It's just that one little tweak in the settings of a few different expressions of source here. It's pretty fun.
That works perfect. Sorry, go.
No, go, please. I was just
go,
okay.
Man.
All right. So as you guys have been conversing, I've been assembling some things that I've personally found stuck out to me. So if I could share my screen with you guys, I've been arranging it in the order to show it to the audience. So we see here, for example, Bock Saga. We see this indent, this line here, right? Now, if for example, take a look here at this line again, I just wanted to get a couple different sources to ensure that there's accuracy and depiction there. So we see this line here. Now, okay, three things come to mind for me right when I saw this. The concept of inversion. Why do I say that? Well, okay, maybe this is a stretch, but the letter Q. I think of the letter Q and the connotations and the abbreviations and the different meanings to it. But before we get there for a second, I think of this, the tethercraft.
Oh,
you see how there's an
STS-144?
Right. You see how there's an indent in the craft, and I've gotten some different images from different.
You know where else there's that same image?
The Dogon, the stone. What is that? The Dropa stone? Is that what it was?
Is it like that too? Because I
know
was
what I'm
thinking
talking about the Dropa stone.
I'm thinking when people are sharing all that crater Earth shit, where there's so much more land and beyond the ice is shaped. There's a pathway through the ice where it's like it's a perfect.
Gate.
Yes, dude, the summer gate.
I'm a big fan. I know.
So we're seeing a pattern somewhere,
dude. This for sure, and that notch. I'm telling you, there's a stone. There's a.
I know what you're talking about. There's a stone disc. I don't know where in the world, but there is a stone disc.
Same thing. Same.
I also had a great conversation with Murph, previously from Realize Radio last night, and he hasn't done a lot of shows lately, but he's very into the color tuning. If you guys are familiar with that, and whether I believe it or not, that those images were the exact colors that I was supposed to be looking for. Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
Yeah. So your point on this was perfect, man. I want to get back to that because this
I like that.
I got
I can tell you what it means for the Bock Saga.
Okay, so hold on. If you could tell us what it means for the Bock Saga, then Brandon, you go, and then I'll lay out my other two things because I have it written down. So no problem.
So, vaguely speaking, let me tell you a little bit about. Let me just give Dave the kind of background that I gave you, Brandon, because he.
If you could too, because I think even a fair amount of people in my audience don't even know.
Okay,
so please,
I did.
This is collected. This is collected stories. Well, it's not collected stories. It's one story from one family, but it also matches up with the Lemminkainen Finnish folklore that was put together by a man going around to all the different woodland tribes in that area back a long time ago and putting together all the stories that they talk about and creating this mythology that lined up with one another. And Bock Saga does as well. Bock Saga tells this story of we got here in the beginning, and how the earth was not tilted on its axis at the time. It was straight up and down. And what that meant was Helsinki, Finland was the North Pole. And this is literally where our term hell comes from. And we'll get to that because my friend
Is this
Yake
what
from
you meant? So is this what you meant a couple days ago when you told me, Dave, it's a little controversial? Or
well, that's the beginning of it. Sure. Yeah,
fair.
there's a lot of controversy for
So,
sure.
sorry to interrupt you, but that's
That's
interesting.
okay. So yes, we'll get to why it's hell, but so in this paradise in the North Pole where the sun was perfectly going around 365 24/7, because and everything was growing, so it was the garden of heathen, as we like to call it. um it was where the first humans kind of had the all father, the kingdom was up there, and every other part of the earth was connected to this all father system, where the same system rung out across the entire world. We were all one people in this story. And we were also all tropical because the entire planet was tropical. There wasn't a drop of ice on there. It wasn't cold enough anywhere. Then Ragnarok happens. And what's interesting is this phrase, this term is kept and is present in Norse mythology as the end of the world, or what is commonly known as like a destruction by a great dragon. So this first cataclysm tilts the earth on its axis. And I actually believe the Bock Saga says it tilts the entire galaxy, that this is a galactic situation. Who knows? But anyway, when this happens, ice covers the entire northern hemisphere. Horrible, weather changes occur. And except for this place in the north, this Udenma, as it was called. And notice the Odin, Udenma. And it meant the sun. It was sun worship. It was, Odin was the sun. Udin was the sun. In this place called Udenma, right in Finland, where it used to be the North Pole, and now the Earth shifted on its axis. For some reason, the Gulf Stream perfectly covers that area. It travels right through there. Also, there's a lot of volcanic activity in that region, and apparently, according to the saga, this kept Udenma from freezing over, unlike the rest of the northern hemisphere that was devastated by ice, in a time period called alt land ice, as in all land ice, where all of these destroyed concentric ring cities that echoed the Allfather's system at the North Pole originally are always popping up and being found and being called Atlantis.
Sorry, very
Yeah.
quickly, could these be the same, and I'm just throwing ideas out, the same individuals that this could be the starting point of, oh, how are there humans in inner earth and how have they survived for so long? Could that have been the initial?
Yes, I think so, because it talks about them living in cavernous areas underground.
Oh
Like,
my God.
so Udenma was unfrozen. It wasn't affected by this alt land ice time period, this all land ice period, but it still was, generally speaking, it was still friggin' cold. So they would live in caverns a lot of times. But also, the interesting connection is we have Arctic animals and we have Arctic people that are all blonde hair and blue eyed, right? It's because of this climate, right? And so the story goes that eventually they survive in this Udenma area, but it's pretty hard. But the rest of the northern hemisphere is annihilated. It's completely frozen and destroyed, and everyone is suffering. There's no advancement. And so during this time period, and you can imagine this lasted thousands and thousands of years. Imagine one group of people being able to philosophically, technologically, ethically, whatever, advance, while the rest of the world was just completely stunted. Now Bock Saga talks about the ice grading the crust of the earth at one point, and it talks about the beginning of this, the receding of the ice, and eventually this would lead into the flood, of course. And this is where, at least according to saga, This is where all these myths come from, of these gods coming down from heaven, because this place in the north called hell to them was also, it means heaven, it means completion, it means balance, and it means home. So these gods, these shiny ones, come down, and a lot of times they're even described as Nordics. Of course, we get that, and we get the inner earth Nordics and the Aryans. And what's interesting about that line of thinking is that when you look at how this original Udenma system of the Bock Saga was set up, uh, it was very Aryan, because long time after this, when the flood happens and when Udenma is no longer cut off from the rest of the world, and they could finally mingle with the rest of the world, this is kind of what myself and Dan Inaki, we're kind of wondering if this is where the story of this fall comes from, or this, when the Nephilim come down, because we're talking about interbreeding. We're talking about the breaking of um, this birthing system, this procreation system that they had kept in place. But what we're also talking, if we step out even further, we're talking again about nature versus artificial. Another way I would say that, I said it on Twitter earlier today. I said it's a war between, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and be the change you want to see in the world.
Yeah.
I
Neither
agree.
philosophy is wrong, but they have their extremes. We see that in the elites, because it seems like these two forces are, and Dave, you and I just talked about the two forces.
The
It seems like
duopoly. Yeah.
these are the characteristics of those forces that have a place of knowledge, how things started, how things got kicked off. And I think from one perspective, the saga is very accurate, especially with the language and how it relates to all of history phonetically, which is
Uh,
really creepy.
if I could say, pertaining to the concept of hell and how when it's cold and they call that hell, if I can make a quick correlation to someone that I think you guys have had on your shows, or I know Brandon, you've definitely had Micah on, where
Micah Dank?
Micah Dank, yeah, he proposes that the concept of hell relative to the zodiac wheel, which was given to us by whomever, possibly what you're saying, Andy, very, very possible, that hell was actually wintertime because you couldn't go outside, you couldn't plant, you couldn't crop, you couldn't
Yes.
eat any of that. But Brandon, did you want to jump in? Only because I wanted to, first off, Andy, thank you so much for
Oh, no
laying
problem.
that out, truly. But Brandon, do you want to jump in before I finished off the other points there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have
Please,
a
please.
couple
Please
thoughts on
do.
this, and it's just fun because I love this story. I love these things, and thank you, Andy. And we had touched on this. Now, one of the interesting parts about this is whenever you talk about like that, it was all a centrally heated area, and then it was all like this, and then all of a sudden there was devastation, and then it only was hot in this one area. Now, what's interesting about this, again, is kind of this idea, and you talk about rings, and you do the as above, so below, and the all land is, all land ice, at land is, of course, that translates. And so you could see the etymological origin of that. And so going from there, though, it seems like that could also be an interpretation of, I'm not a flat earther, but it's one of these things to where maybe this is this ring system, and maybe there's a northern point on this plane, and it originates either from above or some sort of toroidal, to where it recycles things and produces new things and pushes things out, experiences, and comes back in to reintegrate and then reintroduce. So it could be that would be viewed as cataclysms to us, but from some sort of higher consciousness system, all it's doing is rolling this movie of these different interactions in this place with these conditions, and then it changes conditions based on whatever. But this would be viewed in this way as like this plasma apocalypse, as Planet X and Nibiru coming back. Like all of these things can be described in this way. But one of the layout things that I'm thinking is when they think cataclysm and they think only warm in this spot, maybe that sun in this system that creates the rings in this extra land idea is the thing heating it up, and it moved away so far that the people that didn't adapt and the cymatic pattern as it was reforming and as that sun was moving, they call it the migration of species. This is one theory about that Heaven's Gate place, or the Summer's Gate in the model, and it's just sort of this ever expansive thing that as consciousness progresses, it expands out in physical rings in this place. As we evolve, our environment evolves for our evolutionary process as well. So it's this kind of, it's this kind of step thing. So that's just something interesting to me. Also, the idea of hell being hijacked by an organization that wants to distract you, and so they would make it hot.
Yeah, the
They would
first
make you
sun.
burn forever, when in reality, with the origin story, it was really a cold place, which makes more logical sense to us. Practically, who's going to sit there and burn forever? Like, it's a dumb thing. Like, it's a
Also,
dumb
check it
proposal.
out, dude.
I get it.
Literally, the expression "when hell freezes over" comes from this Bock Saga story because it was the only place that didn't freeze.
See, and there you go. See, exactly. That's actually perfect. So it
It's
stayed,
creepy.
but it didn't freeze in the way that it was too hot to freeze. It was just in a way that it
Right.
was safe because it was heaven. It was an environment that was conducive. But again, this is an inversion from the systems in place here that want to steer you away in this great deception. So yes, they would mean that it was hot and you burn forever, but really it was the opposite because it leads you even conceptually away from the idea altogether. That's why when you hear this story, you go, no, that's not my hell. My hell's on fire. Yours is cold.
Right.
So I don't relate to this origin story at all, even though there's probably a shitload of truth in this thing.
Well, and
I love
there's a
this.
whole aspect of this that we've completely left out because I'm still researching it. Dan's still researching it. There's more to the story because when this ice age that we talk about happened, even in like realistic, well, not real, I shouldn't say realistic, but like, the authorities, when they talk about the ice age, it wasn't the entire earth. It was more so in the northern hemisphere. So
Yeah.
we have so when you think about this original system of tropical races that were all connected using the same systems, give or take, you have to think about the entire southern hemisphere and what powers were going on there and what happened when all of these things met. And that's where you have a control aspect to history, but then you also have a game of telephone. It's both. It's not one or the other. A lot of people think it's all just it's telephone. It's just coincidence. No one did this on purpose. It's both. It's not one or the other, in my opinion.
Okay.
Someone knows this fucking setup and takes advantage of that. And I think it's two people. Picture two people with a guy in the middle that doesn't know, and they're fucking each other over to make the person, you know what I mean? Like, oh, well, Brad did this to you. Dude, I can't say that he's doing the same thing because then it just gives up our whole fucking thing. And we hate each other already,
You have nailed this for me lately. I have been pointing out so many things that I disagree with in the thing that resonates with me the most, as far as like psyops go and all kinds of stuff. So yes, it is like this, but I think that this exists on purpose. If we're just a little bit of philosophical here, I think that it exists as a point for you to calibrate. I was talking to Vanessa Lagoon. Her episode will be out on Friday. She's an Australian life coach person, but what she really is very interested in, and she wrote a book called Unspiritually Spiritual, and it's a way more grounded version of this. And it's basically what we were talking about was I don't see Archangel Michael, but some people do, and I'm a fan of that. I think it's awesome, and I love whenever they say, "Hey, Archangel Michael said this about you." I'm like, hell yeah, but I don't see it that way. But there are grounded perspectives that come into this. So when I get back to the Bock Saga, what you were talking about so if you flatten it out, again, I'm not a flat earther. I just think the thing is fascinating. If you flatten it out and you think of the center point of this being the North Pole, where this new sun comes from, speed it up tremendously. You would heat up a zone. It would fling out centrifugal force-like to an outer area. There would be a wave of cool in the middle until a new sun came out, like clockwork, by the way. And then it spins out, and as it evolved over thousands of years, whatever, there's rings that then concentric out with ice in the middle of them as breaks. So this is where you get the black, white, hot, cold, like this
and we're not ready
representation of duality. Yeah, on these huge cycles. And maybe this is what this is, and this is what these cataclysms are. And yes, as those long cycles go, and as this basically iceberg ring moves, with the new sun, and a new sun comes out, and a new iceberg ring moves, it scars the land, it scours, you have volcanic activity as well, and who knows what's going on below this. Like, if this is this sort of toroidal or plane, maybe there's something on the inside, maybe we're on the inside. Who the hell knows? That blew my mind the other day. Somebody was like, we're on the inside of the hollow earth. I'm like, oh yeah, my God, that is so cool. Anyway,
just to look up and see our sun and go, oh, that's the thing inside. Like,
exactly. But this would explain why. Just real quick, and I'll shut up. This would explain maybe why that there was that the ice age happened mainly in the northern hemisphere, because again, if you flatten that out, that northern hemisphere would be where the ring glacier is as the new sun progresses on its way out, and then a new sun comes in, and these species then just migrate out. This could also be, again, this is my favorite way to think about this, where we get UFOs and all of that. They're not from somewhere else. They're from another ring, from a sun that's been here a lot longer, and that's why they have the technology, because they're in this zone or area that's technologically crazy. But whenever you're on those outer rings, you've been through the inner one, so you have access to them. You can always go back within. Again, it's as above, so below. You go back within. Anyway, this
Like
would
the
explain why.
toroid, like how the toroid field flows in and out.
Yes,
Exactly.
it goes back in on
Exactly.
itself.
I
Dude, that goes with the Yggdrasil tree too in Norse mythology. We think it has a lot to do with toroidal field.
right.
It's
You know,
most
Yes.
dense in the middle.
And
you
in
know?
my mind, like the older the stories, the less dicking with them has occurred. You know what I mean? I mean,
Mhm.
you've had
Yep.
more time to dick with them, but what I mean is their origins at their core, if they haven't been really manipulated, like interpretationally, of course, they could have been, but really, if you can look at it and know, there's some truth in there, you know, of course, because that's all they wrote down is what they saw. They didn't, you know, I don't know, to be honest with you, but it
That's
seems in my mind that you would take this a little bit serious.
that's what I'm very curious to see what happens this summer with Bock Saga, because it's not obviously just me and Dan and a couple others talking about it here in the US. You know, we have publications coming out left and right about this Lemminkainen horde. So part of the saga is that when the first family that had continued all this time, way after the flood and everything, that you know these systems continued and all that, when the Catholic Church and the strong arm was coming through that area of Finland after it already completely overtook Sweden and completely converted it a long time before that, when they were protecting the last, you know, the Udenmaa right in Finland, where it was, and the Catholics came in and destroyed everything and killed everybody. But the whole thing is that before that happened, the Bockstrom family went and buried. I think it's like 200 miles, or could be like, yeah, I think it's outside of Helsinki. Um, this place in the Lemminkainen temple, supposedly, that Eeyore Bach, the one who, you know, gave this story to us in the late 80s, he still owned that property. You know, they buried all of their treasures underneath this gigantic temple and purposely buried it, you know, and it was only to be revealed to the world after a certain amount of time. And it's crazy what might come this summer, because more and more people are joining forces to go help this group of temple diggers that have been faithful to Eeyore's story all this time. And they've been going back there and renting excavators and hiring people and digging and digging and digging. And supposedly they're going to dig it up this summer. They have 1,500 people from around the world coming to
Wow.
volunteer to help.
Have they done like
Brandon,
ground
you
penetrating radar and stuff like that? Do they know
They
that there's
did that
caverns and
with the
stuff?
most northern castle in the world. The name is escaping me right now, but of course it draws so many beautiful places in history, like through phonetics. With even just the name of it, it's gonna piss me off that I can't remember it. But they did that ground penetrating radar in that over that kingdom up there, and yeah, sure enough, exactly underneath there was treasures buried. There was something under there, a structure exactly how Eeyore had drawn it out for them, because there was places all over the place that were, you know, things were buried and stored away supposedly.
Oh, cool.
gentlemen, all right. Okay, so while you guys were talking, I cannot thank you enough, and I mean that, because I put together a little presentation of what you guys were discussing. So
Nice.
right, okay, in
The
order
coolest
too.
show ever. All right.
Watch this. Watch this. It's gonna be fun. So
know.
what you guys are talking about, I believe, is something called inter-subjectivity. In philosophy, psychology, sociology, and anthropology, it is the relation or intersection between people's cognitive perspectives. Now, what I find quite peculiar is that if we look at this in a visual sense, it stuck out to me what both you guys were saying. I tried to sketch it out. And so it looks like a mess, but let me explain. This black circle here, right? This represents the intersubjectivity of people's thoughts relative to some type of blueprint that we were speaking of earlier. Then the green rings on the outside represent what Brandon was speaking on pertaining to cymatics and the ice and how things are stopped and stagnated. And this red, purple, and blue that seem all squiggly and random are literally squiggly and random because they represent one's sovereign thoughts, individually respective to their fractality of the source. So what happens is that there are certain thoughts that do intersect in that pool, and the rest of them simply do not. And why do they not? Well, I'm not saying I know, it's just a proposal. So if we stick with intersubjectivity, again, going back to the concept of how the initial, again, what was this called, this circle here, Andy?
It's the alpha beta, right?
Well, so that's their
Sounds like
sound
alphabet.
system. Yeah, that's their alphabet, and it's literally called Alfernes Bitten.
Yeah.
Which,
Okay.
when you look at if you look up where alphabet comes from, it's fucking bullshit what you're gonna find. Because of
Okay,
course they're
fair.
gonna say it goes back to from the Latin.
Got you,
And
right.
You could do
simply
better,
one-
and it's right
yeah.
here.
So we
Also
see
know
here,
that they were dominating, you know.
got you, right. History's told by the winners. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So we see here the indent of this here. Now, okay, we spoke about, if we go back here, of course, just as another source, we talked already about the concept of the tether. And what's interesting, however, before I go on from this, is that over time, over hundreds of years of eyewitness documentation and scriptures and all of this, the consistency has been the same pertaining to the descriptions of the visuals. Now, I'm not saying that's what it is, and there's been stagnation in development, just that that's what we see, which again, going back to the concept of that intersubjectivity, seems to be within that black circle. And I'm just using the color black, actually, maybe not so ironically, but anyways, point being, now, if we head over to this concept of Q here, so we see, for example, that again, like you said, Andy, the ISO basic Latin alphabet. There we go. Now, when we look here at Egyptian, Phoenician, Greek, Etruscan, Latin, the stick, or the whatever you want to call it, of the cube there is on the outside rather than the inside. To me personally, this speaks to a concept of, again, inversion, using intersubjectivity to keep us within this type of trap or whatever you would want to call it. Right. Okay. Now, before I, speaking of the 13 bloodlines, the Nephilim DNA, all of that, I would dare to say the reason it all occurs within here is because, whatever you want to call it, we're a science lab, we're a zoo, or whatever you want to say. Now, I can't believe I'm actually quoting Jim Semivan pertaining to this, but for those who don't know, former 25 years CIA clandestine agent, he said on a podcast recently, he goes, think of, for example, if you are a microbacterial little bug on someone's skin, but that's into perspective, the micro, the macro, that's all you know. Now imagine if, for example, relative to the person, they're getting a needle, an injection of whatever, and to the little bug, that's some big thing coming from the heavens. That's some big rod of we don't know what coming into our world. Again, perspective. Now, to top it all off, let me make sure. Yeah, okay, I got that. Now, to top it all off, this right over here, you could see that I'm going to be applying to the school of,
Dude,
of arts
this
and
is
thing.
awesome.
Oh
Please
yeah.
send me this. I want to hang them on my fridge. I will print these out and put them right on the refrigerator.
Oh,
This
and
is
also,
so
if
sick.
I could say, this was actually on a Zoom call I just did, but again, if we're in a Faraday cage, all of the other light spectrums are bending around it.
Yep.
Which also, by the way, does this not also remind us of what happens when you shoot when you point a laser beam at a UFO? The light bends around it because it's voiding the current grid of the intersubjectivity blueprint that we're in. And interesting. Right. And then this also speaks to cymatics, because let's just say, to your point, Brandon, to what you even said on Twitter a couple of days ago, the clip you put out about, I really thought about that deeply the last 48 hours about, if we're meant to be here, fantastic. But the question has become, for me at least, is there a force that is stopping us in the center here from, I don't want to say ascending, but advancing towards these other layers? This is my only question in general, so to speak. Now, pertaining to the concept of the light spectrum, I want to bring up as well that it's been postulated that Einstein thought the speed of light was a limit. Apparently, it's not a limit. It's a threshold. It's a doorway. It's a threshold to the quantum state, if you want to call it, which apparently, if we are in some type of Faraday cage or trap or something like this, there is a way out right here, but very few of us know it. Now, again, I'm not saying that this is the only way. I'm just postulating. Now, one last thing I want to say is that pertaining to the concept of, again, when I see the tick on the inside, I think of self, sovereignty, inversion, focusing inside, focusing on yourself. One thing I find quite interesting is that, hold on, here we go. I drew this for, okay, so what we see here is, Brandon knows. So this, for example, let's say this is supposed to be a full-on circle, Andy. My drawing is fantastic, just so you know. Now, this can represent, the Hermetic principles, as above, so below. This is supposed to be a C, the conscious, the unconscious, whatever you want to call it. We can even say the people at the top that don't believe in what we're discussing or don't even ideologically open their mind to it, and then people here like us that do. All we need is for, and this is just a speculative idea, is for an intermergence between people on this side and people on that side of the intersubjective belief to merge, and you have that center point, which scientifically Salvatore Pais recently said when it came to creating a void around certain craft, like a plasma field, is via the Planck scale. Now, this is what I find interesting pertaining to the Planck scale, because with the Planck scale, it's almost as if they don't want us to know. When I say they, intelligence, academics, all of this, there is a vortex that shoots out on the other end like a squirt gun into another dimension, which would corroborate Mr. Frederick Portugal's spectroscopy work in far distant space, where you can see a craft coming in like a squirt gun way. And I'll draw it out very quickly. Literally like this. It's shooting. Okay, it's shooting out. And this would be, again, the vortex going in. You see what I'm saying? Now, before, one last thing. Again, this is the same thing, except just vertically instead of horizontally, because again, I think of the toroid field. Interestingly enough, I think of the way in which UFOs, their craft work too. Now, okay, this is what really gets me excited, generally speaking. So I'm going to erase this. Okay, now, we then have this center point, like in the middle here, right? The quantum state, the pineal gland, the Planck, the vortex. Just like when they say you want to astral project, you need to catch yourself right before you fall asleep, between the conscious and the unconscious. Now, what I also find really neat is that, in science, they say, well, how do we collapse the wave? Remote viewing seems to collapse the wave fantastically, because again, when we have a wave like this and you collapse, first off, I think of Naga, the DNA double helix. And then, but if you right. Now, if you collapse the wave, you have a strict, straight charge, if you will. And that's what you have here on this, my stick man, the human body thing. This is what it is supposed to be. I would dare to postulate. This is what it currently is.
Kundalini.
Right. Okay. I'm done.
Dude. Well, first of all, I just have to say that I'm actually a little bit concerned, because these shows just keep getting better and better and better.
This is fucking great. This one should not be behind a paywall, to be honest. I think this one should be. I know we were talking about kind of doing a Patreon show together, but maybe at least give this one out. I don't know. This is some hot shit.
If you don't mind, if I could just keep it for 2-3 days for the members and then take it public.
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm not gonna get to it for a week anyway.
I want to do that, and that's something we were talking about, giving people a glimpse into this anyhow. So yeah,
you know what? I think that the jive here, this is perfect. Let's do that.
A couple days here. We'll throw this out for freezies for everybody, so that you could see kind of a setup of what this whole thing's been about and how amazing. And
it's not going to be just Bock Saga by any means, but this is just something that I wanted to bring Dave into. It's a perspective that we need to at least have on the table along with everything else. And by the way, I never explained what that symbol meant in Bock Saga.
Please.
I never got to it because I wanted to give you all the background and everything.
Thank you.
So I hate to bring it back to dicks, but so this interesting thing about our alphabet, or the alphanusbeton, or any of them, they're all made out of rings and poles, or half rings and half poles put together in different ways, but it's always this symbol of a ring and a pole. And this, according to Bock Saga, was literally because of the North Pole, and this pole literally coming out of it, supposedly, in one way or the other. But also it was talking about, now this language, the way it was created was from the inside out. So when this language started to take form, it literally echoes out in concentric rings. That's how this language is. It's nuts. I can read a little passage about it if you guys don't mind.
Please.
Okay. The saga differs in that it lays on top of what is called the sound system, which is similar to a mathematical matrix that controls what is true and what is not true in the saga. This particular matrix is formed by the root language, a language in which every sound has a meaning and a mark. All syllables, words, and sentences are combinations of these building blocks of meaningful sounds. Since the meaning of the sounds are fixed and cannot be altered, the saga can be passed on to the next generation without any change in its purest form. Just as mathematics is the language in which the natural cohesion between numbers is described and can be thus passed on, so is the root language the natural means of describing the Bock Saga. When in symphonic music, a discordant note is played, you can immediately hear it is not in harmony. The same is true for spoken words that do not fit into the Bock Saga. When names of or facts are given that are not in harmony with the sound system, we know it does not fit into the story and it is fictitious. The sound system is carried by this root language. So this symbol of the circle and the pole is also it's fractal because it's also a penis and a vagina, as are a lot of occult symbolism carried on like that anyway. It's literally about creation. It starts there, it goes from there, it goes on and on from there. We're talking about, think of, we talk about fractal stuff a lot, all three of us. So picture not just an individual being a baby or a little child, picture the human race being a little baby or a little child. So you're seeing things for the first time. You're literally not only creating this language from the inside out, but that's because you're experiencing things from the inside out. This is why creation is so central. We're literally hearing the perspective of the first experience of being human, kind of, which is really intense. And I know that I've experienced it on a psychedelic level and made weird connections. I had a memory pop up from I had a psychedelic experience of finding out about some hidden story that was like hiding inside syntax itself. And I came out of it and nobody believed me, of course, and I didn't believe me and I thought I was just crazy. And then 20 years later, I find the root language, which is phonetically, it carries into every language. Every pun you hear is root language. So this pole symbol with everything, it's everything. It's the combination of the two forces. Again, it's crazy. And it's also where they get mathematics, because it's literally where they could judge like the sun. It's where we get the sundial, and it's crazy, man. It touches all of these little things. If that is any explanation, I know it's kind of all over the place.
It certainly is. But Brandon, you want to go
The thing
first?
I fucking loved about this is that it's interwoven in a sound system, like a coded language, like it's a cryptic language within itself. So like as they speak it, they can tell which parts of it are true, is what the actual quote was. So this is what's interesting too, is so even if they're telling someone about it, people who aren't initiated, that don't know the language in the way that people who they're communicating it to would receive it, if that all made sense, they wouldn't know, and they wouldn't get it in the way that in which it was supposed to be received. So they wouldn't see the truths in it, and anything they spread from that or believed from that wouldn't have been right. Hell, for example, being hot instead of cold. That's like it's woven in within this tapestry of language.
Temporal versus non-temporal.
Yeah. Also, they say in the saga, the language fell when the black ink hit the white paper.
See, because
as soon as that happened, it couldn't be spoken. The sounds are what's important, because it's resonance. And that's why we can look at puns now, or this word magic that we all like to talk about. We wake up and say good morning, and it's like, oh, that's inverted, and it is. That may not be connected to root language necessarily, but it's interesting that puns are the lowest form of humor. Meanwhile, phonetics is the key to understanding what I consider what this story is, and how they're telling the story of how the force, and we can call it the Catholic Church and they call it the Catholic Church, but I think we all know that it's something much more primal inside the human ego, or the human consciousness of the culture, or whatever this being is that we're a part of. that's what was happening. You know what I mean? Like it was a force that overtook this and shrouded everything away. And this was the Tower of Babel, where we had this root language that supposedly was all over the earth. You know, it's pretty crazy. So we had natural cataclysms that fucked it up, but then we also had, you know, this force coming in that wanted everything clothed. The sexuality, my God, that's what's demonized most about the pagan world, of course, from the Catholic side. So it's like, this is the root of that, no pun intended.
See, and
Oh, please.
no, 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 no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna go on one of my tangents again, so you
Okay,
probably
real
best go
quick.
first. Yeah.
So back to what you said though about things. Shit, I lost it. Being connected. Fuck it, I lost it.
Phonetics,
If I
phonetics.
find it again, it was phonetics. I honestly lost it. That's okay. It's my
It's
bad.
okay.
Go ahead.
No
I'll
problem. As
remember it.
I'm
Go ahead.
rambling, please. Yeah. All right.
Go
So
ahead.
I got a little bit
My
of,
bad.
speaking of which, oscillations and all of that. All right. Enhancement, neuroscience.org. Enhancement of gamma oscillations indicates preferential processing of native over foreign phonemic contrasts in infants. Now, what's interesting here, again, is that I wonder, and this is just an intuition thing as you're speaking, Andy, I wonder if they spoke with their lips. I wonder if it was telepathy from the get-go, and then the writing of it, if you will, was just out of a visual representation of that telepathy. And again, it seemed as though when you talked about harmonics and oscillations and all and acoustics, I thought of personally acoustic levitation or something of the sort, which interestingly enough seems to be directly correlated with remote viewing. We now know that because Hal Puthoff has come out and stated that again, as it pertains to EKGs and all of this. Now, if we go to pubmed.ncbi.nlm, what you guys know it is, cortical processing of phonetic and emotional information in speech, a cross-modal priming study. So the current study employed behavioral and electrophysiological measures. Again, electromagnetics, this concept of that. Now, to investigate the timing, localization, and neural oscillation characteristics of cortical activities associated with phonetic and emotional information processing of speech. What I find interesting is that localization, this reminds me of entropy and negentropy pertaining to, again, quantum physics, and locality of perspective via that of the dual slit experiment. Not only this, but this reminds me again of I canceled the tab, but the Faraday cage and the fish bowl or the fish tank and the light bending around it. So we have this in addition to electrophysiological measures of what they're investigating here. Again, what's so interesting about electromagnetics and all of this is that there seems to be within particularly the pineal gland something that is what many have claimed, not me, but claimed is a piezoelectric or piezoelectric activation, which again, going back to the way in which these crafts seem to operate, these crafts seem like a nuts and bolts tin can version of us, in my opinion. And I wonder if, again, if we go here back to the concept of oscillations and all of this, if there is a direct correlation, and I'm just speculating, if they bring up harmonics and oscillations so avidly, I think of Tartaria being wiped out within an instant because of some type of direct energy oscillation, allegedly, or an acoustic thing that apparently spread across everywhere. And I wonder if that was the same for the Bock Saga, except going back to the concept of that tick down in the center was a peaceful revelation or result because of the inversion concept. Do you see what I'm saying? I know I'm a little all over the place, but
like the marking of a golden age, like the age of
right.
Aquarius, like what we're going through now. Like we would mark this time with an inverted Q, not an exerted one.
Right,
That was
right.
the great age of deception.
I'm just throwing ideas.
I love it. It's an excellent representation. I love the symbolism there. That makes sense because yes, we're looking within. That's a within period. That's a harmonious period. When you're external, when you're looking without, when you're looking for outward validation, outward joy, happiness outside of yourself, it always fails. That's where the great deception lies. I remembered what I was going to say, by the way, Dave.
Perfect.
So something that you said earlier was fascinating to me. I'm going to get to it in a second, but also something you said that was fascinating to me was when you had the ring up with the line in the middle with the two portions on either side, and you said they don't know and we do know, and we're pulling each other to the middle. I think that's half true. I think the people in the middle are the ones that don't know. I think that the people but that all people know here, most people know here, the two in the represented top and bottom, the most extremes know exactly what's going on, or at least know what's not true. Some may say exactly what's going on, like let's say the elites. Now they know that, but they use that knowledge against us to say and gaslight us into saying that that's not what's true. So they're actually hijacking the concept and pulling people from a different direction. But ironically, they're pulling us all closer to this direction. It's kind of like your higher self, again, Andy, to your concept of zooming out just one more, that the dark and the light, the dualistic forces here, these bad people, whatever, kind of have something in their hands and they like want you to guess. But really the bad people, after a while, if you're not guessing properly, they'll kind of go. And they do this in the form of destabilization. So they'll shake things up a little bit and they'll rock things. And so there's this inverted process here, again, to this either or concept. And that's like what I was talking about the other night. This either or. Maybe it's not just either or. Maybe there's a third option. And I think that that's what our discernment here, based on those two options, is here to grant us. You'll resonate between the two until you find the middle, like the vortex that you were talking about the UFO coming out of it, man. There's a focal point. There's like a either or, but then there's this triad. That's what maybe the Trinity is all about, like all the symbolism to it. Now, back to something that you did say that was also awesome is that's not what it is, but that's what we see. Now, this is something fascinating. My wife shared a quote from David Bowie about UFOs, and it was about that he said that maybe that's not what they look like at all. He said maybe that's our mind's way with that alternating reticular activating system, my apologies, that really just fills in the gaps for shit that you don't understand. It'll kind of make something up.
Information processing.
Exactly. And so maybe what we're seeing here is, but that quote that you said, maybe that's what it is, but that's not what we see. You know what I'm saying? So like we see one thing, but it's maybe completely different. And that's just why maybe UFOs appear completely different to people. And again, it's all kind of tied together.
Oh my God. Speaking of which, so hold on, if I could say very quickly, yes, all right, hold on. Not that, I was actually trying to do a circle. Hold on. The inter-subjectivity thing here. Let me see 1 second.
Exactly. That's what I was saying. Back to your circle deal with the rings, with everything. And so you're given an environment that's distorted from an area, you're able to calibrate. Yeah, there you go.
Right. Okay. Now I wonder, are you saying that, for example, by finding that middle ground, again, the black circle representing inter-subjectivity of others' thoughts, if you will, this black circle increases in size and overlaps and replaces the green rings?
Yes.
Right, which
so
speaks
it
to
ripples out like ripples on a pond.
Oh my gosh! So
and
what
when
ends
you
up
extrapolate out Atlantis, it's visually represented
Oh
that way,
my
as above, so
gosh!
below.
Right. So then, say the black replaces the green, and then now this black is the new represent. So then we become more of a collective consciousness, and then, holy crap!
And then a new ring appears from the middle out because it keeps resonating out. So
It's
this
a
is the thing
vortex,
too.
and it's the toroid field because it keeps coming.
Man, we
Maybe.
need Dan Winter in here with us right now.
We'll have him hop in on the next one. That'll be fun.
Oh my God.
We'll just keep adding people, like a song that adds instruments to it. We'll
like
just add someone else to this conversation next time and keep it going.
We should frame this as like a science project.
So,
did you guys ever see that 80s movie, My Science Project? That was great.
I saw Weird Science from the 80s.
Yeah, Weird Science was
equally great. Bill Paxton.
Real Genius was
we
also
should we should call that the name of the series.
My Science Project.
Our Science Project.
Our Science Project.
I'm just kidding.
I actually kind of like it.
Like Bill Paxton.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very homegrown. I mean, it doesn't
have
to be just that, but
yeah.
Oh my gosh,
like
this
that.
on so many
and then
different.
You can think of the rings then as experiential levels of consciousness, and maybe like that we continue to
fractals.
Yeah, absolutely, fractals.
Right.
Maybe we reincarnate, let's say, in a physical form, but those forms change as the ring evolves, and you're kind of in this team, basically, that's on this evolutionary process together, and we're all kind of moving out, and it's destabilizing, and it changes. New rings appear from the center and push out, because those are now new experiential realms and cultures and peoples that are having different
from
experiences.
A 3D perspective on the top corner here, if this is the toroid field, is just going in and out and in. Right. Okay. Wow.
And we're kind of skating on top of this place, consciously, and then we just reincarnate, and then our time's over. And then we cycle through something else, and then we reincarnate.
I did want to ask you guys something. If there, if again, not to put both you guys on the spot during the recording, but
We
for
love
the
it.
sake, for the sake of the, for this being the first episode and stuff, I hate to be the party pooper. Would we be able to cap it soon?
Yeah.
Simply because I think we've covered so much that the audience needs to get as a public episode. It's like, whoa. So you know what I'm saying? We covered a lot, but I don't mean to run the. It's not my show. I don't mean to run the thing. I just want to.
No, I
This is
totally agree.
amazing.
Man. That's
Cool,
totally
cool.
fine as a little intro. You know, this was a heavy duty shit. And also, like, I just want to clarify, like, the Bock Saga. I mean, it's one perspective.
Oh
It's
yes, of
just one
course,
perspective, but
of
I mean,
course.
it's a very convincing one on some levels. You know, and I
Right,
think it's just another important piece to our puzzle, and
right.
that's really what we need to focus on, and what it'll tell us about our history, because that's really what we want to find out. And I think, you know, finding out what this UAP situation really turns out to be, this phenomenon as it's so
I think it
corporately
speaks to
branded
the
now,
to yeah.
it's like, you know, it speaks to everything we've ever questioned, you know. So it's not, it's just it's nuts and bolts, but then it's not nuts and bolts, but
Right.
it's all, you know. And the saga, there's almost no spirituality to it. The
Mm,
spirituality itself is being human, and it's very Occam's razor. And so there's a good way of learning from that perspective, regardless of what we all want, you know, decide to pay attention to elsewise. Like, I love the UAP phenomenon situation going on,
but there
as
comes a point.
dramatic as it is in some circumstances. Like, I still, you know, it's ever since I was a kid, so I can't let go of that necessarily. But I do think all of our historical mythological stories, I'm starting to believe that those were at least human based stories. I'm not sure,
Right.
you know.
That's wow, that's so well said, because when you look at it, it's like, okay, it seems as though that the UAP thing then expands to extrasensory perception, which then makes you
So,
think, okay, paranormal, and then it comes to this stuff. It's like there's
exactly.
a whole like Brandon said, it's like the toroid
Connected.
field. It just
Yeah.
all connect exactly.
Yeah, and Dave, you and I have talked at length about how, like, a lot of UFO sightings, the UFO fades in and out when it disappears or appears
Oh,
somewhere. It's
Yeah.
almost like a frequency coming in and out. So obviously, we're dealing with something more than just nuts and bolts. But when it's in our frequency, it's has to have a logical explanation by the
right.
laws of physics. It has to. But outside of this frequency, it doesn't need to accord in that way.
Right. In the accord to this density.
Yeah,
Exactly.
this density has bolts and nuts and computers
Right.
and propulsion systems, and
I
it's.
couldn't I
But
couldn't
then,
agree more.
so
It's
it's
using vacuums to pull from other, yeah.
And think about Roger Rabbit, okay? They were animated and walking around with normal people. It's kind of that equivalent.
dude, this is very
So
psychedelic for
well
me, because
said.
you know, as you're coming out of a psychedelic trip, all the things that were so real suddenly become just normal things again, or they fade, and it's like, well, wait a minute. Wait a
Right.
minute. I was convinced on a level that is unmistakable. And that's how I got into the whole witness stuff, you know, with connecting all these areas, because they
Right.
all make sense together, you know.
Right. Speaking of making connections and all that, could you guys please tell my end of the audience where you guys could be found?
Andy, go ahead.
The Deep Share podcast. I'm at the
Nice.
Deep Share on everything. Yeah, YouTube. I am on
Nice.
Rockfin, but I still haven't put anything on there.
It'll still be.
I'm just busy, man. I'm doing a lot of stuff. But yeah,
Nice.
find me over at the Deep Share, and yeah, reach out, say hi, argue with
Awesome.
me, say,
And
you know, whatever.
and Brandon?
Before I deeply share, I just want to say, Andy, on Dave and I's behalf, both of us, talked a lot about getting a first guest on this, series.
So
that we're
happy
doing.
that it's you.
And we
Hell yeah.
talked
Yeah.
a lot about this, and we had discussed, and I brought up Bock Saga, and so we're grateful that it's you. So your perspective is what we wanted. Your insight is why you're here. So thank you for providing that, dude. You're a fucking badass, and we love you.
Oh, I appreciate being a part of it, brothers.
Hell yeah.
And Brandon, if you could tell my audience where you
Absolutely.
could be found.
I can be found, of course, at expandingrealitypodcast.com. Just go there. It links to everything else. Boom.
Awesome. And just
And
for you guys,
YouTube,
if
by the
it's
way, are fucking
right.
powerhouses, and I always
We're
feel
having
like,
fun.
you know, I'm just so glad that I get to be in these kinds of conversations where where I can really cut loose and just really theorize.
Oh, you said
sometimes,
you
you
two
know?
are powerhouses? Oh, I thought you said
Yes.
YouTube is a powerhouse. That's why
No.
I'm
Oh,
like,
fuck
right.
that.
Getting
Oh,
away
no.
from that. We're getting away from that.
I
We're
was like,
bringing
what? I
YouTube
was
down.
like, okay, it makes sense. All right. Dude,
Yeah,
no,
no,
man.
it's just great because I can just fly off the handle and you guys can catch it wherever it goes, which is great.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
We yes and
Man.
the shit out of this, you know.
Not-
That's what
not
this is.
to-
We were like yes and, you know, yeah.
Not to
Yeah,
stay in that
man.
train of thought, but that speaks again to the concentric circles, the
See,
inter-subjectivity.
it all
Right.
comes back. I love
Right.
the segues.
Before I tell your guys audience if it's cool where I could be found, I do want to mention
Absolutely.
as a friendly reminder for those on audio on whatever platform when this goes public. Again, we've sort of impromptuly agreed to make this a sort of teaser for our paywall series that all of us will have on our respective platforms. It won't be exclusive to any one of us. So I just wanted to give a friendly reminder for the public. I'm personally going to take it public either Friday or Saturday at the latest, if that
Cool.
works.
Cool,
And
cool.
right, so I could be found at Generation Z ZED podcast on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. I will be on soon Rumble, Rockfin, the whole thing, and also patreon.com/Generation Z is where you, of course, you can support the show, extra content, all that kind of fun stuff. So without further ado, guys, this has been absolutely amazing, and we'll catch you all next time around. Thank you, guys.
Thank you guys for listening.
Hell
This was
yeah.
epic. I really appreciate you guys.